Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining our second Talking ASEAN seminar this year. And welcome to the Habibie Center. My name is Marina. I am a researcher at the ASEAN Studies Program. Today, I'll be moderating the discussion on the title of A New Strategic Alliance, Situating Japan-Philippine-US in the Indo-Pacific. And before we begin, I would like to explain this issue briefly. If we recall, 2 months ago, in April 2024, the US, Japan, and the Philippines gathered in Washington to convene their inaugural trilateral summit. And this meeting served as a platform to strengthen their military and economic ties. During the meeting, the three countries agreed on a joint statement emphasizing their roles as pillars of maritime democracy in the Indo-Pacific, and highlighting the unwavering commitment the U.S. reaffirmed its steadfast defense assurances to its Asian allies. It's also interesting to observe the U.S. unilateralism approaches in the Indo-Pacific, ranging from the Quad and AUKUS to trilateral cooperation such as US, Japan, South Korea, and the recent initiative, what we are discussing now, Japan, Philippines, and the US. This trilateral group could mark shifting geopolitical tides and regional power dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region. This development raises questions about potential implication from this trilateral group will bring to the region. Aside from anticipation surrounding China's response in light of this recent US strategic move, the discussion also emerged on the strategic presence of ASEAN as the said driver of multilateralism in the region. Therefore, to discuss this issue more deeply, we are highly pleased to have three distinguished speakers. And before that, I would like to inform you that Lt.Gen.Jonni Mahroza and Ibu Curie Maharani were supposed to be here, but unfortunately they can't attend the seminar for some reasons. Pak Jonni has an urgent meeting with the defense minister, and Bu Curie's condition is unwell. Therefore, we have Major General Prianto and Aisha Kusuma Somantri are assigned as their replacement. So Major General Prianto is the Dean of the Defense Strategy Faculty at the Republic of Indonesia Defense University. Thank you very much, Pak Prianto. And Mbak Aisha is the Director of Research at the Indo-Pacific Strategic Intelligence and also a lecturer at the State Intelligence College or STIN. Thank you, Mbak Aisha. And last but not least, we also have Richard. We also have Richard Heydarian, who are joining virtually. He is a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon. Yeah, once again, thank you very much for Major General Prianto, Mbak Aisha, and Richard for your availability to join this. With them, we will be discussing the recent development of the establishment of Japan, Philippines, US, the prospects and implication of the trilateral group amidst the geopolitical dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region, and also ASEAN's perspective toward this group. So the seminar will be divided into two sessions. The first session is the presentation from all speakers with 15 to 20 minutes for each speaker. So the first speaker will be Richard, followed by Pak Prianto and Mbak Aisha for the last speaker. After the presentation are delivered, we will move on to the Q&A session. So during the Q&A session, the audience here can ask a question directly, while those joining on YouTube, you can write down your question or comments through YouTube live chat feature. Without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Richard Heydarian. He is a global columnist, academic, and policy advisor. He is currently a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines, formerly a research fellow at National Chengchi University in Taiwan. He has written for the world's leading publication and also published several books on international affairs. In this session, Richard will share his insights from the Philippines perspective. The title of his presentation is Japan-Philippine-US, Marcos and New Unilateralism in the Indo-Pacific. Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much again for your kind invitation. It's always a pleasure to join you, our good friends and brothers and sisters that there in Jakarta and Habibie Center. Again, this is I think, very important topic, and I'm glad to see that our friends there in Jakarta are paying attention to some of the things that is happening on the other side of ASEAN, particularly between Philippines and its friends and allies. So I'm just going to share my slides, but for the purpose of discussion, I'm just going to focus on some parts so that we have more room for discussions later on. Again, apologies, I'm joining you, while driving. I just finished a meeting with our Foreign Affairs Secretary and heading to another talk, so I'm trying to squeeze this in between. But please tell me if the screen is clear. 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So I'm just gonna, again, very quickly. You're more than free to read my extensive writings on this topic, on anything that has to do with Philippines unilateralism and Japan-Philippine-US trilateral alliance. So, I mean, very clearly, I'm sure this is extremely familiar to you folks in Jakarta and across the region. I think all of us in the region are engaged in some sort of hedging strategy. I think it's not just because the Philippines is a U.S. treaty ally, and let's say another country has a closer relationship with China, let's say like Cambodia or Laos. It doesn't mean that we're siding with one superpower against the other necessarily. As President Marcos Jr. made it clear during the Shangri-La dialogue earlier this year in his keynote speech, we don't want to choose also between the superpowers. So we may be a U.S. treaty ally, but we don't want the United States to dictate our foreign policy direction. So what I'll try to communicate to you folks in the coming minutes is where the Philippines is coming from and why we're building this unilateral cooperative mechanisms. Now, again, the thing with hedging is that it has to be dialectical, it has to be reversible, it has to be adjustable. So nothing is set in stone. I think the Philippines is in a very fluid strategic position. You know, as you remember, if we had this talk 2 or 3 years ago, I would have had to explain President Rodrigo Duterte, who had a very different rhetoric on China and wanted to develop a very special relationship with China. Now, of course, under President Marcos Jr., while he wants to have strong relations with China, he also wants to be very clear about our red lines in the South China Sea and the Philippine Sea. So it's an instinctive commitment to offset risks by pursuing multiple policy options. So, you know, you can see rhetorics going in different directions, MOUs and MOAs being signed in different directions. But this is really a way for us in ASEAN, especially some of us who really want to have an independent foreign policy, to cope with high uncertainties and high stakes situation, right? It is also a form of insurance-seeking strategic behavior because, as I'll discuss later on, you know, you can never rely on any superpower. At the end of the day, we have to rely on our own as ASEAN countries, whether you're a U.S. treaty ally or not. And that's why it's very important to not overtly and irreversibly take sides between the contending superpowers. So I think all of us in ASEAN want some sort of third strategic choice or some sort of middle position. Now, what's important with hedging is that this is not passive. This is not fence sitting only. This is not just being neutral by saying, I don't want to do anything with the world. It is also proactive. You have to look for opportunities. You have to make sure that you're constantly improving your room for maneuver, that you're constantly strengthening your strategic agency. That is very important. Now, having said that, let's be honest, in ASEAN, I don't know, with the exception of probably 1 or 2 countries in ASEAN, you know, most of us are messy democracies or still post-colonial nations that are yet to develop very mature strategic culture. We have bureaucratic politics. Of course, in Indonesia and Philippines, we have public pressure. So sometimes it's easy to dismiss our foreign policy as being irrational, incoherent. We clearly saw that during the Duterte administration in the Philippines, when the president would say something, the defense minister would say another thing, and then the foreign minister would try to bring things together. So it's okay, it's normal unfortunately normal for us in ASEAN to have sometimes seemingly irrational or incoherent foreign policy positioning. But nevertheless, I think the direction of the wind, the instinct, the predilection of leaders in the region, with probably some exceptions here and there, is some sort of effective hedging. Nevertheless, hedging is only doable when certain preconditions exist, meaning the degree of security threat to us from a particular superpower doesn't cross a certain threshold, meaning a threshold whereby all out war is more likely than not. There has to be also some degree of concern with effectiveness of multilateral institutions in our part of the world, particularly, let's say, ASEAN. No offense to our friends in Indonesia. I think most of us can agree that ASEAN can do better, to put it mildly, on a range of issues from Myanmar or the South China Sea. And at the same time, also, there has to be a degree of multipolarity. So I think in ASEAN, we keep on talking about US-China competition, but we often forget to mention enough how Japan is also a very big actor in our part of the world, and how Japan is a major source of infrastructure and economic development in Jakarta, Manila, Hanoi, and what have you. Nevertheless, of course, concerns with hegemonic ambitions of certain powers, concerns with America's reliability, and I'm sure in Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur, there's also a lot of anger at America for its real and perceived hypocrisies, for its policy in the Middle East, for the crisis in Gaza, and also, as I said, lack of effective multilateral mechanisms to create stable, inclusive regional security architecture. So I think we can have a very healthy debate whether are we reaching a point where hedging is still possible? We can have that debate, but that's more of an academic debate that we can have separately. Speaking of hedging, I think the term bamboo diplomacy keeps on popping up, and I think our friends in Vietnam have been doing a pretty decent job, or at least on the surface, of essentially playing different superpowers to their own purpose. Russia, US, and China in particular, but also we know Vietnam has very robust relationship with India, European Union, of course, in Indonesia and some of the other countries, the rising powers in the global south. India also has its own version of hedging strategy, so-called multi-alignment, whereby at once it's part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, at the same time it's part of the Quad, and sometimes it has issues with both China and the United States in this organization, because for India, what's important is their national interest and their strategic agency and room for maneuver. Now, obviously, the Philippines has a slightly different situation, and part of that is our geography. So if you look at our geography, the Philippines is smack in the middle with some protruding part in the first and second island chain. And I think anyone who's following what's happening in the region, this is not about taking sides, whether you're pro-China or pro-US. The reality is that this is now a realm of great power competition. The US has been dominating this part of the world since the end of Second World War, and before that, Western colonial powers. But today, China is pushing out, and I think China, as a great power, feels entitled to have some sort of sphere of influence in its backyard. Obviously, we don't agree with that in ASEAN, but many strategic planners in China have other thoughts. Not to mention, the Chinese would also say, why should Americans be the hegemonic force in this part of the world? Why can't we Asians have our own order, obviously with them at the top? I mean, and then, of course, there's also this aspect, and I'm sure you in Indonesia can relate to this because you have your own North Natuna Sea situation with China. This is China's nine-dash line. So on one side, you see China's nine-dash line. On the left side, you'll see what should be the more legitimate understanding of countries' claims in the area based on international law, prevailing international law. In particular, of course, in the Philippines, we insist that this should be based on the arbitration award under Article 287, Annex 7 of UNCLOS that came out in 2016, and the 8th anniversary will be celebrated in the coming weeks. So our problem is not that we have territorial disputes with China. I think all of us have our own concerns, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. We do have those concerns, sure. But if you look at China's claim, its claims overlap with multiple ASEAN countries. So it's China, which has very expansive claims. And most recently, you had Vietnam also signaling that they're willing to resolve some of their overlapping areas of claims with us in the Philippines. So we don't have much problem with each other. It's China that is claiming much of the waters, which happens to be also an international water. And as you know very well, parts of that red tongue-shaped, cow tongue-shaped claim of nine-dash line overlaps also with Natuna Islands. Now, of course, a big concern also we have with what China is doing again, we can go on and on talking about U.S. horrible things the U.S. did in, I don't know, Middle East, in Afghanistan, and Gaza, sure. But at the same time, let's also not turn a blind eye what China is doing in the South China Sea. Massive, massive buildup of military capabilities. Yes, Vietnam is doing its own reclamation. Yes, the Philippines has built military facilities in the South China Sea. But as you can see in this image, compare the fake islands that China has built through massive reclamation and compare that to the tiny ones that everyone else has. So China is a complete different order of magnitude. And at least in the Philippines, our fear is that China wants to have its own sphere of influence. So I'm all for criticizing the West and horrible things the US or others have been doing, but I think that shouldn't excuse turning a blind eye to what China may have in mind. Now, having said that, when it comes to the Philippines, we have our own strategic struggle because the reality is that for a very long time the Philippines has over relied on the United States. So I happen to be critical of at least dimensions of our foreign policy when it comes to the United States. So a number of security agreements since the end of Second World War have undergirded our security alliance with the United States. The military basing agreement, the enhanced defense cooperation agreement, the mutual defense treaty, and the visiting forces agreement, right? So these have been the pillars of our bilateral alliance with the United States, and it's an alliance that is far from perfect. And as you can see in some of my writings, in my book, and also a more recent writing for Diplomat magazine, genealogy of Philippine claims, actually, historically, the U.S. has been non-committal to us. So actually, there were many times, essentially from the Kissinger, Nixon administration, all the way to the Obama administration, the Americans refused to clarify whether their mutual defense treaty with the Philippines would apply if the Philippines were to get into armed conflict with another country in the South China Sea. They so that issue actually is very relevant precisely because of what's happening in the South China Sea nowadays. So as you may know, there have been, if I'm not mistaken, at least three collisions between Filipino and Chinese maritime forces. Obviously, China having the far bigger warships and far bigger Coast Guard vessels, not to mention their militia forces. And then I think there were like up to 6 water cannon situations whereby China used massive water cannons to disrupt Philippine resupply missions. And most troublingly was when multiple, I think 7 or 8 Chinese boats converged on 2 Filipino naval vessels and aggressively boarded and disarmed our troops there. Now, all of this has to do with the situation in BRP Shermado, as you can see on the left side, which serves as our de facto base. Yeah, it looks horrible, but actually we're fixing things from the inside. So the Philippines is fortifying that. China is unhappy, so they're doing something aggressive about it. But the question right now is that gonna trigger the Philippine-US Mutual Defense Treaty? So far, the Philippines and US say no. But what if China ends up killing Filipinos without firing guns? What if they kill us by using machete or using, I don't know, knives, right? Or water cannons that are so strong and lethal that they lead to the death of a Filipino serviceman. So questions about American reliance are real and present. And I think I just had like 4 articles just on that issue over the past week because I think this is a very, very serious issue. So not all is fine and dandy between the Philippines and the US. We also have our points of tensions and back and forth. In fairness, though, the Biden and the Trump administration compared to the Obama administration have been clear that any armed attack on Filipino public vessels, troops, and aircrafts will activate the Mutual Defense Treaty, but they have not clarified whether that extends to non-kinetic or gray zone attacks that could lead to the death of Filipinos. Now, as you know, our tensions with China really, really reached new heights after the Scarborough Shoal crisis in 2012. So we responded. So a lot of things that the Philippines is doing, and as I'll discuss very shortly, the Japan-Philippine-US Treaty Alliance is really a defensive reactive measure. So we signed the enhanced defense cooperation with the United States shortly after the Scarborough Shoal crisis. We filed the arbitration award against China after China essentially wrested control of the Scarborough Shoal after the 2012 incident. Now, President Duterte, of course, comes in with a very different take. And interestingly, what Duterte did was to weaponize the ambiguities in Philippine-US alliance. So actually, Duterte correctly questioned how reliable the United States is based on the bitter experiences we had in 2012 when the US did not help us when we had the naval standoff with the Chinese, and also in 1995 when there was that standoff over the Mischief Reef. Nevertheless, to cut the story short, because we want to talk about JAPHUS more, we can have a long discussion about Duterte later on. The problem with Duterte, though, is that despite his very friendly and cordial relationship with China, he was not able to get any major concessions. So the situation actually in the South China Sea did not improve. If anything, there was almost there was a major fatality almost in 2019 when a suspected Chinese militia vessel rammed into a Filipino boat in the Reed Bank, which is also claimed by China and falls within the Philippines exclusive economic zone. There were other incidents like the Wheatstone Reef. Other thing, and I think this is something that you Indonesians can relate to, you got your Bandung-Jakarta railway finally going. I mean, we can have a long conversation about its costs, its benefits, its sustainability, but at least you got something out of your relationship with China in terms of big infrastructure projects. We don't have any with China. China has not made a single big ticket infrastructure investment project in the Philippines despite 6 years of Duterte presidency. So my term for that is pledge trap, empty pledges, not debt trap, because debt trap assumes that there's going to be some investments. Having said that, when Marcos comes into power, he was the ally of Duterte's. In fact, he was part of the unit team. Again, I think this is very relatable to you guys in Indonesia because you had a similar situation between Gibran and Prabowo, right? So Prabowo, the son of the former regime, some would say a little bit controversial, together with Gibran, the son of the outgoing president. Well, in the Philippines, something similar happened. Marcos, the scion of the former regime, the sole son, namesake son of the former Filipino strongman, together with Sara Duterte, the daughter of outgoing president. So actually, China was very optimistic about our relationship with them when Marcos won. Their idea was, well, Marcos is he has his issues with the U.S. He has court cases in America. They have corruption and human rights cases in the U.S. Because of what his father's regime did. And there are tensions, there are frustrations. Not to mention Marcos on multiple occasions when he ran for presidency said that he wants to have a new golden era with China, that he wants diplomacy. He doesn't want war. So let's try to understand why Marcos is engaged in his current foreign policy and then connect that to the minilateral security arrangements we're making. The first thing to keep in mind, again, I'm really simplifying this. I have longer versions of this lecture and articles that you can check. First of all, you have to realize that actually Marcos, just like Duterte, chose China as his first state visit destination. So last January, he went to China, and he really expected to finalize a number of agreements, not only on the economic front, because a lot of Chinese projects in the Philippines were not getting funding, not much movement happening. But Marcos was also hoping that we get some sort of agreement out of China on the South China Sea issue. In particular, we were hoping that China may agree to some sort of a joint development or service contract agreement on the Reed Bank, where we want to drill for oil and gas. We need that desperately for economic and energy security, but China has been preventing us from doing that. Again, you have somehow similar situation in Natuna areas, my understanding is, but it's far worse in the case of the Philippines. But once he arrives in China, you're free to check during his 2-day visit, very short visit, state visit to China, no concessions whatsoever from China. We can have a long conversation. What's the reason? Maybe China was still trying to hedge its bets. Maybe they were trying to still leverage things. But the reality is that was very disappointing to Marcos Jr. And Marcos Jr., at the same time, was proactively being courted by the Biden administration. So during the election period, my understanding is Marcos was a bit nervous about the U.S. He felt that the Americans, because of, the whole Marcos dictatorship, human rights, background, a democratic Biden administration may be lukewarm to him at best. Well, guess what happened? The Biden administration rolled out the red carpet. Biden, according to Marcos, was the first, at least, major foreign leader to call him. The Americans immediately sent their number 2, Wendy Sherman, to Manila, who said to Marcos that you'll have sovereign immunity when you visit America, so don't worry about your court cases. And then they sent Kamala Harris, they sent Anthony Blinken. So they really went for personal touch, personal diplomacy, and active courtship. So just as America was trying to win over Marcos to make sure another Duterte doesn't come to power, or he doesn't turn out more like a Duterte, the Chinese were dragging their foot and not delivering on the promises or expectations that were raised in earlier discussions with the Filipinos. So the combination of those two eventually convinced Marcos Jr. to pivot. And the recalibration he did actually was to push for stronger security partnership, not only with the United States, but also with Japan. Um, and to a lesser degree, Australia and other like minded countries. Now, on one hand, this is just weeks after he returned from China, essentially empty handed. He not only agreed to fully implement the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, when I say fully implement, because when Duterte was the president, he tried to clip the agreement. He was trying to prevent the Americans from prepositioning weapon systems in some of these bases. Marcos not only said go all the way in, he also added new sites in Philippines, northern territories, close to Taiwan, under the EDCA. And I think this is where the Chinese were enraged. Um, and of course, this has gone with the Philippines building up its defensive capabilities, among others. But the other thing that Marcos did just weeks after his fruitless visit to China was he was going to visit Tokyo, and he said ahead of his visit to Tokyo, he said we need a new trilateral Japan-Philippine-US security framework. Technically speaking, it's not an alliance because the Philippines only has treaty alliance with US, and US has a treaty alliance with Japan. But Japan and the Philippines do not have a treaty alliance. But currently, the Philippines is finalizing, my understanding is in the coming weeks, will finalize a reciprocal access agreement, which will allow the Japanese to export increasingly sophisticated weapon systems to the Philippines. And I doubt this will happen, but there are even discussions that maybe Japan at some point may want to not only conduct more drills and exercises with Filipino troops, but also maybe also have some rotational access to some Philippine sites in the future. But I think it's too early to talk about that. Now, that unilateral cooperation among Japan, Philippines, and US has gone hand in hand also with the so-called uh, quadrilateral cooperation with Australia, US and Japan. Now, the reason why the Philippine-US-Japan alliance is extremely important, and the reason why it's coming together with a vengeance, is Taiwan. So if you look at Taiwan, I think everyone knows the tensions that are really increasing, concerns with war, and I think we all also know how important Taiwan is for global semiconductors, essentially the new oil of the 21st century. Now, geography is a big factor. Manila and Taipei are just over 1 hour away by flight, much, much closer if you look at our northern cities where the Marcoses come from, and Kaohsiung, for instance. Kaohsiung, for instance. Now, both Japan and the Philippines are extremely close to Taiwan. And some of our military facilities, just like the Japanese, are in the Senkaku and Ryukyu area, especially in Ishigaki and those areas. We also have military bases very close to Taiwan, particularly Mavulis in Batanes. Now, that is not part of our EDCA with the Americans, and we have not granted Americans access to any of military facilities or even any kind of facility for that matter in the Batanes area. So far, the facilities we have allowed Americans to have are here in the mainland, in Cagayan, in Isabela, with some military exercises most recently here. But nevertheless, the Japan-Philippine-US alliance is extremely important because of its triangular nature. And what the Americans are pushing for actually is the possibility of positioning. Sorry, I forgot to put the slide there. So what they're looking at is positioning weapon systems, missile defense systems, both in southern Japan and northern Philippines, in order to counteract China's anti-cruise ballistic missile capabilities should we move towards a war scenario. Now, just so that we have more room for discussions, the reality is that there is some domestic pushback in the Philippines, including by some who are openly pro-China or friendly to China, including the governor of Cagayan or ex-governor of Cagayan Valley, Mamba. Even the sister of the president, Amy Marcos, who heads the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, is critical of our involvement increasingly on Taiwan issue. But the reality is that actually, if you look at the Philippines, we're not still fully decided how far we want to go on this trilateral with Japan, because Japan and Philippines have their own domestic politics and complications. And importantly, on Taiwan, how much the Philippines wants to be involved in Taiwan. Marcos said, we will not allow the EDCA bases to be used for offensive military purposes. But there are Filipino military officials, among others, who have said that they could be used for contingency purposes. Meaning, yes, if there's war in Taiwan, they could be used by Americans, potentially. So this is still an ongoing debate in the Philippines, but that is really what's undergirding the Japan-Philippine-US trilateral alliance, which has a Taiwan angle to it. But finally, let me also say on this, there's also a strategic economic angle to it. Because the other thing we're looking at is also creating a new economic corridor whereby I call it Taiwan plus one, whereby Taiwan may move or may concentrate some of its lower end semiconductor and technological production to the Philippines. So the Japan-Philippine-US Treaty trilateral grouping. So if you look at the summit earlier this year in April, one of the things that came out are these economic corridors idea that Philippines doesn't want to be just a military base for these two powers. Philippines doesn't want to be just a weak link here. Philippines wants to make sure that the trilateral will expedite our own military modernization. More importantly, we want economic investments, strategic economic investments, also from Japan and the United States. And that's where Taiwan can come in because Taiwan is a semiconductor superpower. And they may also have some of their packaging design and other parts, not to mention intermediate, lower high-end production also move to the Philippines. So lots is going on here. The Japan-Philippine-US trilateral alliance is not only about China, is not only about Taiwan, it's not only about US and Philippines and Japan, it's all of the above, essentially. But it's a moving target, and there's still many, many imponderables and contingencies that we have to take into consideration. Okay, I'll keep it there, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much. I hope I provided at least some sort of a rough pencil sketch of what's going on there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard, for your insightful presentation looking at the Philippines' perspective on this issue. I noted several things. You mentioned about the Philippines' position between major powers and the shift of the Philippines' foreign policy from Duterte to Marcos Jr. You also touch on the concept of hedging and an update on recent accidents that happened a few days ago between China and the Philippines Coast Guard. I think we'll have to see further action from the Philippines because I read on the news that the Philippines will try to talk to China about this issue. Once again, thank you so much, Richard, for your presentation. Now, I would like to invite, terima kasih. Now, I'd like to invite the second speaker, Major General Prianto, the Dean of Defense Strategy Faculty at the Republic of Indonesia Defense University. He is currently teaching the Territorial Defense Strategy course at the Total War Strategy Study Program. And before joining the Republic of Indonesia Defense University, he served as the Director of Defense Resources at the Ministry of Defense. In addition, he has vast experience in overseas assignments, such as in China, the US, India, Japan, Sweden, and Myanmar. He is also the chairman of the delegation of Track 2 Network of ASEAN Defense and Security Institution, or NADI, from 2022 to 2024. He holds a PhD and master's from the Republic of Indonesia Defense University as well. Major General Prianto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, honorable speakers and distinguished guests. It is a great honor for me to be here at the Habibie Center, where I represent Rector of Indonesia Defense University, Lt.Gen.Jonni Mahroza, PhD, who is unable to join us due to the prior agenda at the Ministry of Defense. On behalf of Indonesia Defense University, I extend his apology for his absence from this discussion. So without further ado, allow me to start the presentation. The title of today's presentation is a New Strategic Alliance Japan-Philippines-US, or we can say JAPHUS. This is our today discussion. Start with an introduction, development of establishment of JAPHUS, prospect and implication of JAPHUS, and lastly, and Indonesia perspective and expectation of JAPHUS. As we all know, the Indonesia-Pacific region is the world's most dynamic geopolitical zone, which is part of 65% world population. In 2040 will become 50% of the world GDP, and rich in natural resources that are needed by every country in the world. The Indo-Pacific region became a new era of economic security and political trend, connected to the multipolar region and creating opportunities and challenges at the same time. We move to development of the establishment of JAPHUS. As you can see on the screen, the JAPHUS timeline of the territorial effort started in June 2023 when the three national security advisors met in Tokyo. Continue on July and September 2023. The three foreign ministers met and shared several agendas regarding security, economic, and politics. In September 2023, they deepened the trilateral cooperation, and in December, they established a common framework for trilateral cooperation. So, ladies and gentlemen, on 11 April 2024, the leader of Japan, the Philippines, and the United States met for the first summit and issued a joint vision statement that was based on shared values of freedom, democracy, and respect for the rule of law. They also committed to strengthening and growing economic relations. And one of the highlighted issues is the shared vision of free and open Indo-Pacific region. They aim to advance the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region and the world by supporting the Philippines Coast Guard capacity building. The development and establishment of JAPHUS also consider the rise of China. As we all know, China has become one of the countries that has emerged in its economy, politics, and military in region. China also become known as the main actor with its influence in cooperation with countries in the region, but also create competition at the same time. Furthermore, here's the prospect of JAPHUS. For the counterbalance of China influence in the Indo-Pacific region, which is efforts and strategies by the alliance countries to balance or reduce China dominance and influence. JAPHUS also shares common security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. Still, JAPHUS strengthening diplomatic relations between the three countries and technology transfer and increasing the role of the state in the Indo-Pacific region to fulfill national interests. However, JAPHUS also created the security implication potential to create security dilemma, which is the action taken by the country to improve its security capabilities that cause insecurity for other countries. Also create regional instability such as reaction or respond by increasing its military capabilities and military escalation. And overlapping for complex security arrangement where the region with the various arrangement will have different goals, mandates, and obligations, and at the same time create competing goals. JAPHUS also proceed the ongoing tension between the two great powers, which is between the US and China, and increases geopolitical, economic, military, or other aspect of future competition. Besides, the JAPHUS creates the potential war for the South China Sea and East China Sea is related to the territorial dispute and geopolitical tension involving China, such as the Filipinas Party Island, Harbour Island in the South China Sea, including a naval base in Mahroza Island in the East China Sea, and Japan's Sakishima Island and Yonaguni Island in the East China. Laos is heavily militarized, where the region has a significant presence and concentration of military forces, infrastructure, and activities. On the other hand, if we are talking about the ASEAN perspective and expectation of JAPHUS, we cannot be separated from the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which is the ASEAN members countries' platform and its role to maintain peace, security, stability, and prosperity in Indo-Pacific region. ASEAN outlook in Indo-Pacific is a mechanism to face challenges based on the principle of promoting cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. ASEAN expect to commit to centrality, openness, transparency, and inclusivity for strategic trust and win-win cooperation in the region. However, we also know that there are several aspects attention to ASEAN role in the dynamic of the Indo-Pacific region, which is related to respecting sovereignty values. Nevertheless, the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific is meant to contribute to the maintenance of peace, freedom, and prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesian perspective of JAPHUS is based on the free and active principle. By encouraging Japan, the Philippines, and the US to maintain their openness through ASEAN, Indonesia also enhanced the spirit of defense diplomacy by strengthening Indonesia defense cooperation with countries in the Indo-Pacific to keep peace in the region. As the Indonesia Defense Minister already stated in the Shangri-La Dialogue 2024 in Singapore, he stated that Indonesia will take a role in maintaining stability and security in the Southeast Asia region, as well as Indonesia's contribution to collaborative efforts to handle global security issues. And to that action, strengthen Indonesian position as one of the countries that actively contributes to creating peace and stability at regional and global levels. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the conclusion. First, the Indo-Pacific region become the rising center on the 21st century economic and security trends. Second, JAPHUS is new geopolitical dynamic in the Indo-Pacific region. JAPHUS is a strategic alliance action on how countries adapt to facing global challenges. And the last four, related to the regional uncertainty and ambiguity, which is when countries in the region have many response and interpretation of JAPHUS. Honorable Speaker and distinguished guests, we have reached the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to an engaged Q&A session. Now we return to the floor to the moderator. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Major General Prianto, for the comprehensive presentation. I highlighted some points you mentioned, first about the timeline of the Japan-Philippine-US development. And also one of the motives of this trilateral group is to counterbalance of China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. But at the same time, this group also creates a security dilemma. We can see the China's action in response to this group, especially after the summit that already held in April. China criticized the meeting and opposed the practice of bloc politics, they say. Yeah, I'll get back to you later on during the Q&A session, Pak. And before I turn to the last speaker, I would like to gently remind the audience on YouTube that you can write down your questions or comments on the live chat feature. I'll read them out to the speakers later on during the Q&A session. Now I would like to invite our last speaker, Aisha. She is currently a lecturer at the State Intelligence College, or STIN, and the Director of Research at the Indo-Pacific Strategic Intelligence Think Tank with specialization in international security studies. She earned her master in global security at the University of Glasgow and her bachelor's degree in international relations from Universitas Indonesia. In addition to her academic roles, Aisha also collaborates extensively with the Indonesian government, particularly to contribute the formulation of Indonesia's security policies. Yeah, I'll give the floor to you, Aisha. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. This is a very nice discussion, I think, that we have. I see some familiar faces here and new faces as well, and I'm very happy to be able to talk in this forum today. So before we start to the materials, I think I would like to ask you to imagine like a new global architecture that is happening today. Because what happened in today's situation is quite different with what happened during the Cold War. We see the alliance between states as something black and white, whether you're joining like the Eastern Bloc or the Western Bloc. But currently, we see that the relations between the state is very interdependent, especially when we talk about it in the realm of economics. We see that China is one of the US biggest market. There are lots of industry that is actually being done in China, outsourced in China by the US. Conversely, I think US is also Chinese biggest market. So if we see that, the world has become something that is more gray. And I think one of the things that they do to balance each other is towards multilateralism, which is what we talk about today. Multilateralism, so JAPHUS, is one of the form of multilateralism, which is multilateralism in a small scale. So basically, it is usually conducted to fulfill a certain goal. In this term, JAPHUS is actually conducted to balance the influence of China. It contains the influence of China in the region. So basically, it's not that big, but it's done the job. So we see that before JAPHUS, there are actually several multilateralism that is actually happening in the region. The first one is Quad, and the second one is AUKUS. And I'm pretty sure that all of you here have heard about like both of the multilateralism. And we see that the member of JAPHUS alliance, which is Japan and Philippines, both are very close to the US, and they do have like a mutual defense treaty. With the Philippines is in the 51, and with Japan, sorry, it's in the 60. And we see that for the MDT in Japan, Japan has given like the US the right to actually deploy its military and actually establish military base in Japan. Meanwhile, if we see the Philippines military base agreement in the 47, it gives the right for the US to use the military base in the Philippines post-World War II. So there are more than 16 military bases of the US in the Philippines, and I think there are 7 additional military bases that is actually can be established during the crisis. I will see that. I think all of you might have already read about this, but JAPHUS is actually like one of like the newest cooperation between like the 3 states, and the focus of it is based on economics. It's basically seeing investment targets, telecommunications, semiconductors, cyber health, and the most important thing is to actually increase the effectiveness of like economic corridors in Luzon, Manila, Subic, and Clark. But one of the things that attracts the attention of the international world is regarding the security and defense sector. And we see that in multilateralism, usually there's just a nuance in it. And how we see the security and defense sector in JAPHUS is very dominating, since, as the previous speakers have said, that the idea behind like the establishment is to actually deter the influence of China. And we see one of the things is the capacity building and capability building for the Philippine Coast Guard and the Armed Forces of Philippines, as well as conducting joint training and joint patrol. And we see, I'm sorry, like this is really small, but I think you can get like the PowerPoint from the committee after the event. I'm really sorry. I should have made it bigger. Sorry. And we see that from the previous one, for example, the Quad, we see that multilateralism is actually considered as like a challenge to ASEAN centrality during, when the Quad was first released, everybody was saying like, how will ASEAN view the Quad? Where we stand in this new global architecture? What is the role of ASEAN in the future? Because ASEAN has enjoyed like the position of being a central role in the Asia. For example, if we see like the Eastern Asia, like all the three great powers in Eastern Asia, they hate each other. They're not getting along with each other. And this is quite interesting because they can sit in one forum, in ASEAN forum, the IRF. And we see that here, the problem is, even though actually like Australia, Japan, and India, they are committed to actually respecting ASEAN and its international political views, however, we see that the Quad by America is seen as something ineffective because India is very independent. Its policy has turned into something like Indonesia. It is very hard to actually drive, and it is considered as it is reluctant to actually do like direct confrontation to other states in terms of China, because India has like a good relations with China despite of like their beef in territorial matter. So the second one, AUKUS, I think this is quite exclusive, and we see that the cooperation is focused on security and technology. And in the future, I think there are actually notion that AUKUS will actually increase their membership towards Japan and South Korea. And we see that why JAPHUS is very interesting and important to us, because JAPHUS contains Philippines, which is the first ASEAN states that is actually included in multilateralism against China. And that is actually quite interesting. And boom, suddenly, Philippines become the center of attention from like the great powers and all the states that actually have dissenting voices against China. And this is quite interesting because they have like a converging interest in it. First, Japan, when we talk about South China Sea, we tend to focus on like what happened in the southern part of the South China Sea. We're not talking about like the Eastern China Sea. So Japan wants to expand the attention of the world into the East China Sea, and they feel like it needs to be concerned. And the US, they want to actually add a forward presence. I don't exactly sure how they want to increase them because they already very present in the region. I think they have lots of military bases, but of course it's want to add the forward presence. But the first one, Philippines, they want to actually, and they need reinforcement to handle the PRC in the South China Sea. So interestingly, in Indonesian term, berarti mereka butuh tukang pukul. All right, and we see that this is quite interesting because it has something to do with like the Philippines domestic politics, and we see that the first speaker has talked about it like earlier, and I'm not an expert on Philippines, so I can only like scratch in the surface. But we see that actually the politics that Bongbong Marcos initially conducted in the Philippines are actually very open, very pacifist, and we see that BBM, well, Bongbong usually like shortened as BBM is actually meeting both sides on like international level. For example, during UN General Assembly in 2002, BBM was actually asked to improve relations with US as a priority, and they actually met with like President Xi as well. During the 2022 APEC summit in Thailand. So one of the things that he said is to the importance of communication in handling the South China Sea disputes. The thing is, well, the high presence of like the Chinese Coast Guard has changed the direction of his foreign policy and approach in handling the matter of the issues. And we see that it has created like a domestic tension as well as international attention on how the Philippines has handling the issues. So we see that when the start during the start of his tenure, he tended to actually bridge like the communication between two parties, but during but currently I think he's leaning towards to the US. And the question is now, what will happen that Sarah Duterte is actually stepping out? And the question arrived, which whether BBM will survive its term. And one of the things that we should pay attention is that the Philippine government might use the issue on PRC as a common enemy for the internal political consolidation. Would that be possible to actually make that as the key factor to actually consolidate the support from like the internal government to his? I'm sorry, I didn't get the chance to actually translate all of it because I actually first, when I read this in Indonesian. But when we see that there are some actually impact that is resulted by JAPHUS from ASEAN, and we all can agree that the Philippines is one of the states that is actually most impacted by the Chinese aggressive behavior in the region. And one of the things that with Philippines' accession to JAPHUS, one of the things that we can see that it has become the center of attention in like the global level, but will Philippines actually going further away from ASEAN? That's the question that we can actually ask each other. I still remember a month ago, I think, no, it was like 3 weeks ago, I met a commodore from the Philippines. He was a speaker from one forum. And I asked him about like the transparency policy that the Philippines has. And then he said, well, if you ask whether it's effective or not, the question sounds very ASEAN. We're doing this and we refuse to call what happened in the South China Sea as a gray zone conflict. It's a breach of territorial integrity. He said something like that. So interestingly, they have a very firm approach toward like what happened in their territory. And we see that Philippines' domestic sentiment about ASEAN has been hopeless, and we see that the discussion of COC is very slow. We remember that the DOC was first actually published in 2011 or 2012, I forget about that. But then the second discussion of COC never actually realized. Indonesia has actually pushed the agenda several times in ASEAN level, but it never went through because China will never sign it. And even the DOC in 2012, China never actually abide to it. So the question is, what is actually the function of creating like the COC? Also, when we talk about like that, the Philippines is carrying out like a transparency strategy. So basically, they're taking the matter into their own hand. And this thing of like, this is all that we can agree, I think, like the mechanism of the ASEAN is very slow. And there's a question whether the sign of the CAC can actually change the fact that China is actually dominating the ground in South China Sea. And this has been happening in the last decade, so this is not something new, but in the last decade, we see no improvement at all in terms of like the clearance and or the signing of the COC. So the thing is, we can see that the Philippines is actually having a good relations with both states, and I do believe that most of the values of the Philippines and Japan are aligned. But the question is, to what extent can the Philippines determine its own attitude regardless of the US agenda? So we can see that the Biden, exactly as the first speaker said, has stated clearly that the breach of the Philippines' national integrity is like one of the concerns for like the international world. But the question is how far the US will do something or act about it. There has yet to be a statement that actually backed like US position in this matter. And we can see that what can be the justification if one day, for example, the PRC conducted a threat to the Philippines as a common threat. Like what can actually make that a common threat for the Philippines and the US? And the second one, I think, when a crisis does happen, the question will be, who will take charge? The Philippines or the US? Who has the authority to actually conduct like the defense system? Who will be the first responder? That's actually a very difficult question to ask, because when we see like the draft of like the JAPHUS, it doesn't include like the mechanism, but we don't know because it's still young and it might be improved soon and actually develop into something like more elaborate. But currently we don't have like any clear picture on like this matter. The second one, I think the Japan's position in this matter could be like a balance between like the U.S. influence in the South China Sea and the security consideration. I'm sorry, the LCS means like Laut Cina Selatan in Indonesian, but apparently because I use like automated translation, it doesn't translate into slides. But when we see that Japan's strategic position, when they mention the free and open Indo-Pacific, it will always abide to that. And we can see that the Japan strategic adjustment in response to changing power dynamics in the Indo-Pacific, especially given the growing power the US and China rivalry, they try to be more involved in the region and they actually try to actually include their agenda in it. So I think this is a last slide. The committee of this event actually asked me several questions, but I would like to ask back to you audiences. I hope this can be like our discussion for future Q&A. The first one, the question that arises from JAPHUS is, what is the perception of the effectiveness of ASEAN mechanism in resolving conflicts? I think this is very clear that like many of the people in ASEAN are having like a skepticism regarding this, and many are questioning whether like ASEAN mechanism is very effective or not, and some even try to challenge like the notion of like the non-intervention. The second one is regarding like to what extent will the JAPHUS actually create insecurity in the region that leads to the arms buildup. This has been mentioned by the second speaker, General Curie, regarding this, whether like the condition of like JAPHUS will actually create like a military buildup, whether we like it or not. The security point of like JAPHUS is actually to build and to assist the development of like the PLN, the Coast Guard and military of the Philippines. So my question is, will that actually cause like insecurity among like the neighbor regarding that? And the third one is, will other multilateralism emerge in ASEAN in response to JAPHUS? This is interesting because the logics between multilateralism is you actually blur like the clear definition of like balancing. For example, if we talk about BRICS, there's India in it, which is traditionally, inherently, even though India is very neutral, India is pro-US. In other sense, we can see, for example, Quad, where we can see like other multilateralism, and as much as we can say that if we create like lots of multilateralism, will that actually also create like a better balancing between each other? For example, will they actually like a multilateralism that actually pro-China that will form in, for example, Asia-Pacific to actually balance this? We don't know. But it will sure make like the global architecture more complicated, but in a good way. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much. We will save the discussion for the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for providing ASEAN's perspective toward the JAPHUS. You started by explaining the big picture of global architecture development. And it's also interesting to see other examples of multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific region, such as Quad and AUKUS. Thank you for touching that point. I think we'll still have to see the further development of JAPHUS in the near future. And before we turn to the Q&A session, I'd like to inform you that Richard has a conflicting schedule at this time, but he will try to join via phone if possible for the Q&A session. And before I pick a few questions from YouTube, I'll give chances to audience here. So just please raise your hand and mention your name and your affiliation. Yes, starting from you, please.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Rio. I'm an independent IR scholar. So my question will be a little bit theoretical. So I see this trifecta not only as balancing, but also a form of deterrence, just like the previous trifecta, the AUKUS. So however, this is actually a similar question posed by Aisha. is this trifecta, this form of deterrence, a form of response to a security dilemma that's already happening in the Pacific region? Or will this trifecta cause another spiral model security dilemma in the Pacific region? Maybe there will be some form of new unilateralism in the form of bandwagoning, something like that. And also, moreover, I'm also concerned about the implications that late in the game theory, like the incomplete information, like in the age of information wars, I don't think there's anything that such thing as a perfect intelligence, and also the array of the bargaining models that are available on the table in the complexity of the Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you. So you would like to just specific to Mbak Aisha or? Sure, sure. All right. Thank you. Mbak Aisha, would you like to address his question?
Okay, of course. The question is whether this is actually a response to what happened, or will this cause a spiraling model in the future? Well, this is an interesting question. I think it could be both. In a way that this trifecta is actually it's actually established because they see like the growing influence of China. It's no doubt that actually like Biden's administration is like actually more focused on like the region compared to, for example, like Obama administration. I think Biden and Trump, even though they come from a different party, I think like the foreign policy that actually encompasses like both presidents is quite similar. And we see that this is a response to the threat that came from Chinese aggressive behavior in the South China Sea, especially when it includes the Philippines. One of the purposes that they want to actually fulfill is to actually maintaining like the security in the area. And whether this will cause like a spiral loop, yes, I do believe this is a possibility. Not exactly, but this is a possibility. But it could be prevented by what? By a good confidence building measure, by communication, by ensuring neighbors that this cooperation is conducted based on like peaceful purposes, and it is conducted to actually for defense purposes. So I think that is actually like a way to actually prevent like the spiraling down from happening. So yeah, that's from me. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Mbak Aisha. Major General Pianto, would you like to add the answer?
Thank you very much for the very good question. I would like to add, I think I strongly agree with Ibu Aisha that already mentioned regarding the question. So I would like to add that this cooperation, or what can I say, this is the, we have two perspectives from this cooperation. First is about this is the challenges for this cooperation, or we can say this JAPHUS, from defense perspective. Yes, it is to respond the influence of China, and then from other perspective, that already mentioned before, that this also to increase the economic aspect, technology transfer, and other aspect of human life. So I would like to add that we have some perspective based on the JAPHUS, but the JAPHUS is still young, so we can we cannot see what is the implementation in the next, but hopefully the implementation of JAPHUS is in a good way to reduce the tension in the region, and to maintain the stability and the peace in the region. So I think that's my view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Prianto. Another questions, please? Uh,
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Kim, and currently I'm not affiliated with any other organization. And my question to the panel is that when AUKUS was created, I remember how Indonesia reacted very negatively towards it because they were concerned about the possible security dilemmas, arms race, and so on and so forth. But so far, I haven't noticed any reaction from the Indonesian government towards the possible creation of JAPHUS or even the unilateral meeting. So does this mean that Indonesia is less concerned about the potential dangers that this unilateralism might create? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Baisha, would you like to respond, or from perspective of the Indonesian government?
Yeah, thank you. But I think already mentioned that we have some perspective regarding this issue. If we can say this, if the negative perspective that due to the tension in region become more increased, so JAPHUS can be used as a military alliance, so that can make equality the superpower between China and Philippines, supporting by the U.S. But other side that I mean that we have also a positive perspective. The equality of power, it can prevent the war because they already know about the risk if the same power, the same military power can cause a huge risk if the war can happen. So there is a two perspective that I would like to mention. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Mbak Aisyah, please.
The answer to Kim's question regarding whether the Indonesian government is less concerned, to be honest, I don't know, because it's very new. JAPHUS is very new. It's just established in April, and I do believe that like what happening now is only the initial talk phase of the JAPHUS itself. And as we see, like there are several fields in which like the cooperation will take place, which is economic and like security, but like the implication of JAPHUS itself, it's still not unclear. And I do believe that we have to make sure what happened in JAPHUS, what is the objective, what is actually the scope of like its operation, what is actually like the extent of like the collaboration between the states to be able to actually respond to that. And I do believe that one of the things why the Quad Alliance, Indonesian response and ASEAN response was actually so big on that, because that's the first one. Believe me, after the second one and the third one, like you actually just become like, okay, this is another like unilateralism that's happening in the region. But no, I'm just kidding. No, but actually, yeah, I think because this is like relatively new, so you have to make sure, and you have to actually ensure like Indonesian position in actually addressing that, whether we have, whether like our positions is like pro or against, or even neutral. We have to actually be really able to actually assess like how this will impact Indonesia in the future. So yeah, that's my response.
Yeah, thank you very much. Next, yeah, Mbak, please. Fifi, here.
Thank you so much. Is Pak Haider here? Pak Haider?
I think not yet.
Oh, okay. Okay. My name is Mustika Mutakaliman. I'm with UNHAN, but also I'm a diplomat. So perhaps I can offer my, this is my personal opinion, of course, but as career diplomat, perhaps I can have some, provide my 2 cents on this. I fully concur with what have been mentioned by our dean, that this JAPHUS can bring a new dynamics on the table because it can present a security implications. in the region. Of course, the Philippines mentioned JAPHUS would be beyond China and also beyond Taiwan. And through that cooperation, they would want to explore greater economic opportunities. But we have to remember it's heavily on military side and security and defense side. And really, I don't think so far there's a big change, because even before the JAPHUS, like being mentioned by Aisha, there's already 16 military base of US in the Philippines. I think it's true. We can perceive this JAPHUS as a deterrent policy from the Philippines, just like being mentioned by our dear previous speaker. We have to be very mindful of that. And in my personal view, I think we can fully understand their stance on this, because they are the very country that firstly affected by the situation in the South China Sea as a claimant state. And but as a Foreign Service officer, of course, I can remind that ASEAN will remain as Indonesia main cornerstone for foreign policy, and also our first concentric circle. And even though many discourses mention about the relevance of ASEAN, but we have to remember that personally, I also believe that ASEAN is a modern day miracle that stops bombing from neighboring countries, that allowing Indonesia sleep at night, that allowing Malaysia sleep at night in the good faith that nobody's going to attack one another. That's one thing. And another, my personal view is, I think through JAPHUS, the US just continuing their stance in Indo-Pacific region. It is a new but old flashpoint. They have this many alliances and initiative in the region with many countries, Quad, of course, and then what else? AUKUS, and then IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership for Prosperity in 2022. Even though on paper, formally the US fully support the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, but I believe what they're doing is really watering down ASEAN measures in Indo-Pacific, because what has been done by ASEAN, i.e. driven by Indonesia, is to make sure that ASEAN and the policy in Indo-Pacific is ASEAN central and led by ASEAN countries, inclusive and also win-win solution, just like being mentioned by our dean, and having standalone unilateralism like JAPHUS, I think it's really endangering, if not sidetracking, the very essence of ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific itself. And I think this is homework for CAMRO and also TNI, just to be very, very mindful of our next steps in Indo-Pacific, so we can make it beyond, another initiative and another jargon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustika, for sharing your personal thoughts from the diplomat's perspective. Next questions, please.
Baik, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Zulham. I am from Universitas Nasional and allow me please to ask in bahasa. Baik, mungkin ini ditujukan untuk Bu Aisyah. Dalam hal ini kan pendekatan strategic alliance ini merefer pada pendekatan militer. Namun kan kita tidak bisa menafikan pada pemilu US yang akan berjalan dalam beberapa bulan terakhir. Ini ada dua persepsi yang berbeda yang dimana Donald Trump untuk nge-blow up pergerakan Cina itu menggunakan pendekatan ekonomi berbeda dengan Biden yang lebih ke arah ancam-ancaman dari AUKUS, Quad sampai sekarang JAPHUS. Nah, mungkin bagaimana sih jikalau ini beralih ke Trump lagi, apakah aliansi ini bahkan dari JAPHUS, AUKUS sampai Quad ini akan ya mungkin ya udah the gone be bygone aja, atau ini akan tetap berjalan? Lalu ini saya melihat agak kontradiktif yang dimana disampaikan oleh Richard bahwasanya JAPHUS ini menjadi harapan bagi Filipina untuk modernisasi. Saya nangkepnya lebih ke arah modernisasi militer. Namun saya melihat dari Bu Aisyah tadi lebih ke arah capacity buildingnya. Nah, apakah ini JAPHUS ini pada akhirnya Filipina ini mau bergabung dikarenakan ada yang mentok dari ASEAN Defense Industry Cooperation atau enggak? Mungkin itu saja. Terima kasih.
Yeah, thank you, Zulham. So Zulham was asking about JAPHUS and also the future of U.S. election and how if Trump wins the election, how will the U.S. approach some of the unilateralisms and also the Philippines modernization related to ASEAN's defense industry? Please, Bu Aisyah.
Thank you, Mbak Marina. One thing about President Trump, well, first of all, I think like the US election hasn't been done and the result, we are yet to know who will stand as president. But if President Trump is elected for a second term, well, there are several things that we should anticipate. I think like his foreign policy approach is a bit unpredictable, not a bit, but very unpredictable. And we can see that the traditional or conventional theory that we all understand on international relations just doesn't actually apply to President Trump. So we can expect something that is very interesting. However, I do believe that when you say that the Donald Trump approach is mainly on economics, I beg to disagree. I think one of the things, when you remember, Quad was actually established during Trump presidency, and one of the subject of like Quad alliance is on the military alliance. So I do believe that it is actually started during Trump presidency, and somehow I do think that even though Biden came from like a different background and different party, like the approach of Biden and Trump somehow is similar, because like they're very focused to actually contain like the influence of China. This approach is kind of different with what Obama did. Obama is actually quite benevolent toward China. It is actually try to actually build relations, create interdependence. It is evidenced by like how he actually established TPP and other organization. So when we talk about like President Trump or Biden, we can expect like something that is actually more limiting the movement of China in the international stage, whether it's by economics or by military. So I do believe that as long as like the unilateralism doesn't actually affect US negatively, I don't think that would be a problem. But again, it's unpredictable, so we cannot actually 100% sure about that. The second question is regarding like whether it's become a hope for like modernization of the Philippines army, Philippines military. I do believe that modernization could happen in lots of ways, especially in capacity building, technology transfer, and on all of stuff. Up until today, I think there are no clear definition on what consists their cooperation in the military. But I think both me and Richards have like a different interpretation or expectation regarding like what will happen in JAPHUS. However, I do believe that it's might not because, well, ASEAN, and you talk about ASEAN, and it's quite interesting because Mbak Mustika also said about ASEAN before. I do believe that here's the thing that we have to understand about ASEAN. I mean, like, I'm a scholar, I'm not like I'm not a practicing diplomat, so please pardon me if I made like wrong and slip second of error. But I do believe that like what happened in like ASEAN in a regional level is quite different with what happened in a state in domestic level. So the domestic politics, the foreign policy of a state is quite different with what happened in ASEAN. In ASEAN, it became a shell. It is flexible, it is non-partisan, it is actually inclusive to all the ASEAN member states and like all external parties through dialogues, discussions, and other form of like international cooperation. However, what happened in domestic level is quite different. What there's the concern of people when we talk about like there is actually a new emerging power or a new emerging alliance that came from like a Southeast Asian background is about like the divisiveness of ASEAN. Because as we can see, not all countries in ASEAN is actually conducting the hedging strategy. Indonesia is conducting hedging strategy, but Philippines, when JAPHUS happened, is not hedging anymore. I beg to pardon. Yes, I disagree with Richard. It's not hedging anymore. It's self-balancing. Yeah. So the right of the Philippines to actually say that we are actually neutral, it has been gone. It is very US-centric, I think, the policy, and I do believe that what happened, and we know that like Philippines is actually very pro-US right now. What happened is actually it will create like a further divisiveness between like the states in ASEAN, whether they support the US or support the China, and will actually like create like actually like a build up in that sense. And I think I'm not really sure how China will respond to it because Xi Jinping I think has already said like a speech that mentioned that JAPHUS is anti-China cooperation, anti-China alliance that is unfair. But I do believe that in lots of sense, I think yes, it will disrupt like the harmony of like in Asia, but I'm not really sure to what extent it will actually create like a ripple in ASEAN harmony. So that's my question, my answer, sorry. Sorry.
No worries, Maisha. Thank you so much for your answer. For Bapak over there, please.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I interest when Richard talk about Indonesian, China and Philippines, and then that's tension. It's a big tension. I think it's a influence to Indonesian impact. Yeah. Now I want to know. Yeah. I want to know from the speaker. Yeah. How about influence if China doesn't want to and then to Philippine delegation to how to talk to China? Don't you disturb the territorial Philippine territorial? Because I know when 16, yeah, when the China fishing vessel come to territorial Indonesia and then close to Natuna, it's like make a tension Indonesia and China, and then future if not Indonesian can make us something to relation in ASEAN. China always disturb it. Yeah, I know the JAPHUS established like China wants to disturb the territorial in ASEAN, in especially China So China, I see. Yeah, I want to know about that. About because this is impact to Indonesia. It's problem. Can you give
Yeah, thank you, Bapak. So just want to clarify your question. I summarize basically how if China doesn't want to negotiate with Indonesia and the Philippines about territorial disputes, and for example, South China Sea, right? Okay, maybe Pak Prianto, would you like to address this question first?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, that we should to believe that our foreign policy already mentioned that freedom and active. So it means that we try to not to involve with any other side, any other party. So that we like to do is to take the diplomacy as the first line when we face the problem for that already mentioned. If we have a problem or conflict with China, so what we should do, of course, the first is we use channel of diplomacy. We cannot do using the armed forces or other strategy or other way that can cause the violence. The first thing is that we can use is diplomacy. So basically, diplomacy is the first line of defense. So I think this is my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mbak Aisyah, would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you, Mbak Marina. So the question whether Indonesia will do something about it, Indonesia has been one of the active peace broker in South China Sea conflict, and I do believe that our diplomats can attest to Indonesia's role in actually creating and establishing the OC in 2011, and also like the discussion of like COC up until today. However, I do feel like diplomacy itself, I agree with Papri, is not alone in this matter. There's a reason why China prefer to actually conduct a bilateral discussion with the state, especially with the state that is a literal climate state in the South China Sea. For example, one of the state is Philippines, because the power parity between both countries, it's so huge that they have very little bargaining position to actually stand up against China. That's why the reason why ASEAN is so important in actually helping those states to actually gather together and discuss their interest in the South China Sea is because ASEAN can be a force multiplier for those countries. Now, the interesting part on why finally Philippines is conducting like this strategic event, there is actually one quote that I would like to quote from Clausewitz. War is the continuation of politics. When everything else fails, you go to war. This is what the Philippines does. Yeah. So, well, we hope there will be no war. Of course, I'll be very happy if that doesn't happen, but I can understand, we all can understand why finally the Philippines took strategic decision to actually protect itself from like the external threat. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Mbak Aisyah. I just want to add what our government has done, especially regarding to the North Natuna Sea claim. Under Jokowi's administration, the Indonesia government did several actions, actually, Pak. First is releasing a new map of the Republic of Indonesia by and included the North Natuna Sea. We changed the name of Laut Natuna to North Natuna Sea. That's the first thing. And the second thing, our government also sent diplomatic notes to the Chinese government and also to the UN. And in addition, our government also deploy our navy and our naval ships to the area just to warn China if they attack us, we already there. That's what we did under Jokowi's administration. And I think in the future, Indonesia should utilize ASEAN as platform to negotiate with China, because we can bring major powers, including China, to discuss about this matter. Yeah, thank you very much, Bapak. Next questions, please. Oh, so many. I think we still have 10 minutes left. Maybe just make it short. Yes, Mabda, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Marina, for the opportunity. My name is Mabda, and I'm a researcher at the Habibie Center. I'll keep my question very short. And my question, I think it's phrased in a very ASEAN-esque style, if I were to quote Mbak Air. But my question is, what is the subsequent logical step that ASEAN can take to maintain its relevance? Because I think the central question that JAPHUS posed to ASEAN is, of course, how will it influence ASEAN's relevance? And I think this is this is a very old age question that has been posed to ASEAN for a very long time. But I think this goes to prove having one of the member states actually being included in the arrangement. I think that goes to prove just how the relevance of ASEAN has been being even more tested more and more as we are speaking. So I was just wondering, in your views, what is the most logical step that ASEAN can take in the next few years to at least increase its relevance, and if I'm being generous, to increase its effectiveness, so to speak. Thank you.
Papri, please. Yeah, how we can increase ASEAN's effectiveness or ASEAN relevance in the future?
Yes, thank you for the question. ASEAN was established is not to face the military threat. ASEAN is can be used to face the non-traditional threat such as climate change or transnational crime, drugs. But ASEAN is not military alliance. So as I already mentioned that for ASEAN, if we talk ASEAN, we should talk about 10 countries together. So to effectiveness, I think we already have some platform that ASEAN can be used, like we have IDMM or ASEAN Defense Ministry, not only involving ASEAN member states, but also involving from other countries. So we call it IDMM Plus, involving the US, the China, Russia, Japan. So hopefully in this platform, it can be used to more effective to determine any issue in the region. So that's my view. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Prianto. Mbak Isha, please.
Thank you, Mbak Marina. Mabda, this is a very interesting question, and I'm pretty sure my answer will not actually cover like all the field that might cover like the area. But I think one of the thing is the most important part is the uniformity of the ASEAN member states' position. As we can see, previously we talked about like how there are actually like a different nuance in like the regional level and domestic level. But the question is, can we actually reach that uniformity between like the ASEAN member states in order to address like the China behavior in the South China Sea? One of the things why finally the Philippines try to actually create its own like trifecta and do like a cooperation outside ASEAN, I think it rooted from like the disbelief on like the ASEAN system. So I think one of the things that we can do is to expedite like the discussion on the code of conduct in the South China Sea. But to be able to do that, I think this will be very uncomfortable for all the ASEAN member states. But the question will be, will you actually be willing to sacrifice some of your interests in order to create that harmony and uniformity? In order for that, you need to have like a same standing point of view. You all need to have like a same position with China and say like to China loudly that we don't agree with your claim in the South China Sea. So I think there's a question whether like a state will sacrifice their interest a little bit. And I think when the common understanding can happen, actually, well, ASEAN, really, they're not like a military coalition or alliance, but I think collectively, as a state, we can actually conduct a sanction, not based on the organization, but as we can see, we are intergovernmental organization, but collectively in ASEAN, when we say that we want to do it all together, can we actually do that? The answer is still no. Because we have like some country that is very dependent on like the Chinese economics. For example, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, they're very dependent on China. So I think so far, when the question arises, how can we actually increase like the effectivity of the ASEAN? I think it's uniformity. I think it's like the same standing point of view regarding the issue itself. When we can actually reach a consensus regarding that matter, I think like ASEAN will be unreliable as a conflict resolution organization. So that's my answer.
Yeah.
It doesn't help, but well.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Thank you, Mbak Aisha. I think because we still have 7 minutes, I think I'll pick just one question. Yeah, the guy on the back over there. Apologize for this limited time.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Dava Lt.Gen.Jonni, and you can call me Dava. Thank you for the opportunities. I'm from community in Next Stage Power. I want to ask some maybe simple questions, but I think that these questions must be clarified. So my question is, how does the JAPHUS Alliance contribute to ensuring resilient economic supply chains in Indo-Pacific region? And what strategies are emphasized to achieve this goal? I think that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dava. Anyone, would you like to go first? Mbak Aisha, please.
Dava, I'm really sorry. I'm not an expert in economics, so I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, because I think this topic is more focused on defense and security field. So yeah, Pak Pri, do you have any insight about the economic supply resilience regarding to the JAPHUS?
Yes, I think because the JAPHUS is still young, so and then we still try to analyze what the aspect that can cover by this cooperation. But when we see the aims of this JAPHUS, also mention about to increase the economic. So what the aspect about the economic, of course, we still need to analyze, we still to see about the implementation of the cooperation. So maybe in this time I can not answer correctly, but we still need time to analyze regarding the concept of this cooperation. Thank you.
Yes. Here we have Pak Teguh Reza Shah. He is a senior lecturer at the Universitas Pajajaran. Pak Reza, would you like to provide your insights about this topic? Yes, it
Thank you,
would be great.
moderator. My name is
Thank you.
Teguh Reza Syah from Universitas Pajajaran. I'm honored to be here. Well, JAPHUS is new, Pak. It's a brand new regional institution in the Asia-Pacific region. But it shows one thing. China is really a regional leadership going to the superpower status. Because China is on its own, it has to deal with JAPHUS, Quad, AUKUS, ANZUS, and not to mention bilateral defense treaties involving the US and Japan, Philippines, and Vietnam. In my opinion, even though there is no direct response from China, it will encourage China to sharpen its knife quietly in the South China Sea and, sorry to say, its border with Taiwan. We will see China's greater muscle in its border with the Philippines and Vietnam. China will be reluctant to sign the next code of conduct. China will be more assertive in dealing with the North, with its own 9-dash line. Even though we haven't seen, has China sharpened its knife? Well, bamboo diplomacy usually speaks quietly. In this case, only 2 months after JAPHUS, in June, we have another strategic cooperation involving DPRK and Russia. And then in this case, I can imagine we would witness greater uncertainties not only in Southeast Asia but also in the Korean Peninsula. This is really something. And then what could ASEAN do? We keep saying diplomacy is the front line, but is our diplomacy credible enough? Well, I do not know the mind of the Indonesian strategic planners in this case, but my advice is we have ASEAN community. Please follow the blueprints in the area of ASEAN Political Security Community, ASEAN Economic Community, and ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. And in this case, it would be very difficult for us to deal with China in the future. China could say, hey, one of your colleagues, the Philippines, is part of JAPHUS. Why do you want us to commit in the second reading of the Code of Conduct? So in this case, please, ASEAN, refrain yourself. But at the same time, please conduct greater cohesion, because if diplomacy is the first line of defense, make our diplomacy more credible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Reza, for sharing your insights. It's very great to hear your opinion. And we're reaching at 4 p.m. now, and due to time constraint, I think we should wrap up our today's discussion and apologize for other questions that can't be raised in this seminar. And once again, please give a round of applause for all speakers. Thank you so much, Major General Prianto and Mbak Aisha, for coming here. And I'd also like to thank our audience for actively participating both in this room and on YouTube. Please stay tuned on the Habibie Center's social media, because we still have a series of Talking ASEAN seminars and also other interesting events in the upcoming months. Once again, thank you very much for your attention and good afternoon.